Okay, hello boys and girls. Let's go ahead and get started with our homework today. So for this week, our last week before vacation, our story is called Homegrown. Whoops, sorry. Forgive me. Let me change the color. Okay, so it is called Homegrown, okay? So as always on Mondays, we read and annotate, and then we're going to be doing some multiplication. So reading and annotating, let's go ahead and get started. Remember, you are going to take some notes on the side telling me what the story is about. Okay, on Saturday, Eric, his sister Tasha, and Mama went shopping. Mama had agreed to take Eric to the garden center, and he could hardly wait to finally get there. Eric thought about all the vegetables he would plant in his garden. At the garden store, Eric picked out 6 sturdy, healthy tomato plants, 6 wire cages for them, and 8 pepper plants. He also chose the seeds he wanted, and he paid for everything himself. His neighbor, Mrs. Salter, had given him some poles to support the bean plants, so he didn't have to buy those. First thing the next morning, Eric was outside with his gardening tools, seeds, and plants. Then he saw something move in the soil. "A worm!" he exclaimed, digging around in the soil where he intended to plant his garden. He discovered more worms. "There are worms in my garden," Eric called out to Mrs. Salter. He hoped she would suggest what to do. "You're lucky, Eric," she said. "Worms are good for your garden because they help you keep the soil loose. Then it's easy for plants to grow downward and for rain to reach all the way down to them." Eric planted the seeds and plants. Then Mrs. Salter showed him how to put up the bean poles, and they put the wire cages around the little tomato plants too. When he was done, he rushed into the house to announce that he had a garden of his own. Eric watered his garden each day. In 2 weeks, he had tiny seedlings. By the end of July, the first vegetables in Eric's garden were ready to be picked. At dinner that night, Tasha tasted the squash. "It's good," she said, looking surprised. Eric smiled. "That's because it's homegrown." Okay, remember, read and annotate, please. Okay, multiplication table. Here's your multiplication table. Some of you need it, some of you don't, but you are basically going to give us the answers to these problems. 2 times 8 is 16. 4 times 3 is 12. 7 times 1 is 7. And so on and so forth. Okay, don't forget the ones at the bottom too. Okay, and that is it for your Monday's homework. Pretty easy.